at school, after school stuff, travel ball and Boy Scouts and band concerts. And there's so many things that our children can be involved in. And if we are not providing quality programs here, you can see how quickly they could get distracted in doing other things other than doing things at the congregation. Number 8, they're financially secure. They're not operating Sunday to Sunday on a hope and a prayer, on paying the bills. They're financially secure. Number 9, they have developed a leadership development program. You're developing future leaders within your congregation, future deacons, future elders, future ministers, future Bible school teachers. And you're actually developing that and training them and getting them ready for the next step. And then finally, an impactful mission outreach. And that's what I'm going to focus in on more than anything to the rest of the hour and in my sermon today is impactful mission outreach. There are some congregations that their mission statement is doing everything necessary to provide for the growth of their church. And it's all an inward focus. What can we do for us? What can we do for me? How can we make our congregation stronger? How can we? And all of their energy is inward focused. And the Bible is pretty clear on the fact that our mission work should be an outward focused ministry. The Bible is very clear. Jesus was extremely clear on the fact that we need to go out instead of focusing in. Now, obviously, we do our physical checkups to make sure we're healthy, but we want to be healthy so that we can do the things that we need to do in our jobs or with our families or whatever we do. Of course, there has to be inward maintenance. But our main goal, our main focus is going out. And the going out part is what we're going to be talking about today. Am I toying? Oh, okay. So let's take a quick and closer look at the mission work. We could stop and look at all 10 of these and, Brandon, you could do a whole, I just showed you a 10-lesson series if you so choose. Our preacher back home, everything is a series. This is the first of 3 lessons. I don't know if he has a standalone lesson in his arsenal or not. But we're going to look at the mission work part today. Okay? Now again, let's take a quick walk back. So how do you think Katanning did on their spiritual checkup? If we went back and we looked at those 10 things again, how do you think you're doing? How do you feel about your checkup? Do you walk away from the doctor going, "Well, I'm better than I thought I was," or do you walk away going, "Oh my goodness, how am I still upright?" How do you feel? Do you feel pretty good? Because I feel very good about Katanning. When I was going through this, I was looking at the different things, and I'm like, oh yeah, I was thinking, Katanning shows all the traits that I can tell of a strong, growing congregation. You hit all of the marks. So you might be going, well, we're doing pretty good. Ben, y'all are doing pretty good. No, you don't say y'all up here. I'm sorry. You are doing pretty good. Sorry, my southernism leaks out every now and then. But can we do better? Is really the question. Is good enough? Is good enough? Or do we push on for excellence? I spent a long time, in my 38 years of teaching, a big chunk of that was I was coaching. And in athletics, there's good is not good enough in athletics. Oh my, no. There is no good enough. In athletics, you strive for excellence. You may not achieve it, but you're definitely striving towards that. And I think from a personal standpoint, most of us probably, good is not good enough for most of us, I would think. And from a church standpoint, from a congregational standpoint, good may not be good enough, if you know what I mean. I'm not trying to get, I hope you know where I'm coming from. Can we be challenged to step it up a notch or two? So the role of the local church, according to the experts, the role of the local church, especially in missions, is multifaceted. It covers a lot of different aspects. But of all the different roles and responsibilities, we know one thing for sure. The local church and the church as a whole is commanded to go and make disciples of all nations. Our objective is to spread the gospel to all nations. As Paul put it, to the Jew first and then also to the Greek. I think from a more specific standpoint, you might be able to say to the local town first and then the state or the country or the wherever the other mission work might come. I'm a firm believer that your mission work starts right here, Katanning, Pennsylvania. It starts in your families. It starts in your schools. It starts in the businesses that you work. It starts in the places that you shop. It starts wherever you go. Your mission outreach starts right here. And you expand from there. Okay? Let's go to the next slide. So what is the role of the local church in missions? The role of the local church is the raising up, training, and sending and supporting missionaries, as well as supporting mission work all over the world in the capacity that you have been given. Now, I know that we here at Katanning, at least where I come from, from the South, we consider Western Pennsylvania a mission field. I hope that's not offensive to anybody, but in the deep South where I come from, and there's a Church of Christ on every street corner. There's places in Alabama where, according to the official census, 1 out of every 12 people are members of the Church of Christ. We're known as the Bible Belt Buckle. And so when we talk about mission outreach, lots of times Western Pennsylvania would be, categorized as a mission field. So if you're a church, if you're a congregation in a mission field, do you have to have a mission mind being here? Are you thinking about mission work if you're in the mission field already? And I think the answer is yes, of course. Absolutely. To give you an illustration, probably 20 years ago, we were in Honduras, and we had raised the funds, and we had found a congregation in the States to oversee the work of a church plant in Tegucigalpa. And so we built the church building in a little subdivision of the capital called Los Pinos. And the church started, and a church was overseeing the work, and they brought in they hired a Honduran preacher that had graduated from a preacher training school, and that particular congregation began, and almost immediately their dreams was to plant another church. As soon as they could get their feet up and under them, they wanted to go and plant another church. And so here's a mission church doing mission work, preparing to plant another church. And they planted a church in another place in Tegucigalpa called Diamante. And that congregation has built itself up. And from that church, they planted a church in Tierra del Padre. So this one congregation planted a church, and then in return, they planted a church. So here are mission churches creating mission churches. So even though you're in the mission field, you should have the mission mentality of going out and doing work somewhere else. Okay? So that kind of puts us where we are. And so you are given this according to the capacity in which you have been given. What resources has Katanning been given? What opportunities has Katanning been offered? And in what capacity have you been able to meet those things, those challenges? And again, if you're doing a self-check, you might be thinking A, B, C, D, E, F, G. We're at a very healthy congregation. We really are. This is a really healthy congregation. You have to remember, I'm usually doing this to churches that they're trying to get started. They're trying to move out and to start doing some sort of mission work. I'm preaching to the choir. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, sort of. But it's nice to have a checkup. It's nice to have a refresher. All right. The local church that pursues missions is a healthy church. On the other hand, churches that do not seek to go out to spread the gospel is not a growing church, and it will become stagnant at some point, no matter how great your programs are at your church to bring people in, no matter how great the preaching is, no matter how great the youth program is, if you're not going out, it will eventually become stagnant. It will eventually become stagnant. So you must consider what you've received and the fact that you have the most wonderful news in the world about salvation, about God's grace, and how in the world could you possibly keep it to yourselves? Right? When you find out something that's super amazing, you almost feel an obligation to go and tell people about that. Right? You don't want to keep that to yourself. You want to take it out and share it. All right? We often make distinctions between the local church and between the missionaries and mission work. We want to put everything in categories, and we want to box them up in a nice little box and put a bow on it, and those things never really intersect with each other. But in reality, even though all this is in different contexts, it's still the same thing. It's still the work of the church. If you can consider mission work as part of your church work in general, and you don't separate it and say, well, that's the mission, and this is the local, and this is this over here. Everything's the same. Everything's the same. In context, it's all one. Those who go overseas, those that stay local, those that work with the church, it's all the same thing. And we're all called to go and to minister. So you do what you're called to do. Some of you in here have been called to work right here. We probably have a fair number of people in here that are from Katanning. You were born right here in Armstrong County. How about a raise? How many people? You were born right here in Armstrong County. Oh my goodness! Look at that. How many of you were born outside of Armstrong County? Anybody born outside the state of Pennsylvania? Ooh, the hands drop off really quick there. We're transplants, right? We're here for whatever reason, a job or family or the beautiful weather. But we're here. And so this is our homes now. If you're from Armstrong County And this is the only thing you know. And your outreach is for Armstrong County. That is fantastic. You know more about this county than anybody else. If I were to bring a mission team from Huntsville, or actually from Tampa, and we came up here to do mission work, what's the first thing that we're going to have to do? We got to rely on you guys to find out what needs to be done, because you know what Armstrong County needs. We're here to assist in what you need. So local ministry is super important. And you know more about that than anybody. You are the experts of this area. You know how people think. You know what's important to them. You know what they do with their time. And so you are the most qualified people in the world to do mission work right here. I'm probably the least qualified. I'm Southern born and bred. I've lived in big cities my whole life. And I feel like a duck out of water up here, completely. I think it's really interesting. It's really neat. But I am a duck out of water. I don't know how things operate around here, but you guys do. All right, moving on. I don't want to beat this too badly. The Great Commission, which I'm sure you're super familiar with. Matthew chapter 28, Mark chapter 16, both say basically the same thing. It says to go and to make disciples of all creatures or all nations, baptizing them in the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And lo, I will be with you always, even to the end of the age. Jesus says, go. Imagine in the first century when the 12 apostles and the chosen, the ones that were chosen to go, and Jesus says, okay, go. They went. They went. Before Paul's life ended, Paul penned the fact that the gospel had penetrated the four corners of the earth during his lifetime. From the time that Jesus died until the time that Paul died, the gospel had reached all four corners of the earth. That's pretty impressive. But that required people going. All right, moving on. So the Great Commission. Now let's get a little bit personal. You got to ask yourselves the 5 W's. The Great Commission. Who's it talking to? Yeah, me. He's talking to me. What is he talking about? Going. When does he want me to go? Did he put a time stamp on it? He doesn't say, thou shalt immediately arise and go to Zimbabwe to do mission work. But it also doesn't say, as soon as you've got a lot of Bible knowledge and you've got a lot of life experience, and when you've got your finances completely booked out and you got all your bases covered, then go. It doesn't say that either, does it? He says go. And he says it with a little bit of urgency. So I don't think he wants for us to take a great deal of time preparing to go. It's kind of like starting a family. When you get married, Steve, when you guys got married, did you sit down and say, okay, let's do a budget. We're going to have some children. How much is it going to cost us to raise these daughters that we're going to have? Did you sit down and do a budget analysis of how much it was going to cost you to raise your children? Well, actually, knowing you guys, you probably did. But you were thinking what? Month to month. If you do a budget breakdown of how much it costs to raise a child, and you're going to wait until you have your finances in order before you have your children, we wouldn't have any children. The population of the earth would have stopped because we're never ready to have children. So what do? We just launch out in faith, right? We launch out in faith and we just figure out a way to make it work. There's no instruction manuals. You just got to go for it. And sometimes I think mission work is the same way. You're never going to be totally prepared to go. So sometimes you just got to go for it. Jesus said go. And I think sometimes we need to just say, okay, I'm going. I don't even know exactly how I'm going to do this yet, but we're going to make it happen. We're going to make it work. All right, when, we talked about, where do we go? He said go into all the world. That's a big place. I think there's, 198 countries in the world today, depending on what day it is. That's a lot of going. Does he want all of us to go to all 198 countries? How many counties are in Pennsylvania? Anybody know? 60-something? Even if he just said, go to all the counties of Pennsylvania, that's going to take a while. That's a big thing, right? Or go to the major cities of Pennsylvania. How many major cities do you have? Well, you might say, oh, we have 2. We have Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. But no, you have several more than that, right? So you have to have a plan in place. You have to determine where. You have to determine when. You have to determine who. But I think we all get the why. To spread the gospel. See, I'm a Bible teacher at Foundation Christian. I teach 8th grade Bible. And my class, we study the life of Christ. And it's kind of interesting because our school, it's a Christian school, but a large number, my wife can attest to the fact that a large number of our students are not church, they're not churched. There's no religious foundation from their families. You know, they send their children to our school because it's a good school. And they might even send their children to our school because of the Christian atmosphere and the Christian principles that we live by. But most of my students are not, they're not well versed in the Bible at all. So as we go through things, it's kind of interesting because stories that we talk about that are so familiar to us, they've never heard before. And some of them literally sit on the edge of their desks waiting to find out what happens in these stories. And so from one way of looking at it, it's exciting to see these children hear the Bible for the very first time and how excited they get and how much they learn from these lessons. And then, you know, the ones that have grown up at church, so to speak, you know, this is kind of second nature to them. It's old hat to them. They already know the story. They know what happens in the story. But one of the things that I've kind of implanted in my students is, what is the gospel? When we talk about the gospel, you know, when I first asked them, they're like, I don't even know what you're talking about. You know, what is that? You know, what is that? And so when we talked through the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus, and then how that's the good news that we're taking out to the world. And they're like, oh, wow. That's really cool. And so all of my students, if you walked up to one of my Bible students and you said, what's the gospel? Their answer would be DBR 1 Corinthians 15. DBR 1 Corinthians 15. The death, the burial, resurrection, as Paul put it in 1 Corinthians 15. I think it's kind of cool. They get it. They understand it. So, again, local ministry first. I'm working in a mission field right there in Tampa, Florida at Foundation Christian Academy. Am I running out of time? I am? I don't even know where we're at here in the lesson. Let's see what else do I have here? Okay, well, I was supposed to talk about Honduras a little bit now, and I guess we're going to skip on a bunch of this stuff. But anyway, I told Brian I don't have any prepared notes, so I don't know where I'm going with this. So I just went through a 45-minute lesson giving you your spiritual checkup. So hopefully what we talked about was helpful as you do a little internal reflection on what Katanning is doing and how we're doing it and what we're going to do with it. So we'll end it with that so we can have our break between class and worship assembly. Thank you so much for being here. You're dismissed.